Record this meeting. Okay, thank you for that. There's always some technical problems when you're doing live events. So the way we do this is usually I just kind of ask questions and throw them back and forth to each of you. I do have to say too, I had no idea until right now that the two of you know each other and have collaborated, and that's wonderful. I think that's great. And there's also so much in the background of you that I could ask about without even getting into the questions, but I will try to stick to the questions a little bit. And the first one is, how or why did you become a poet? And Brian, you were the last to speak, so I'm going to put you on the spot first for that question.
Sure. So like I was mentioning before, I've actually not started writing poetry until like the last like year and a half ish. So I have been writing plays for most of my writing life. And then, as we all know, the pandemic that we're still in happened. And like live theater was kind of like decimated. So I started reading a lot of poetry because I found it to be like the only thing my like brain could like process. Um, and but it was also like an outlet for me, like personally, like that I could start writing in that was like for me and like made me feel like I was in my body. And what made me start playwriting, I guess to like backtrack a little bit, was because it's so communal and that like the end product or like thing that we make together like requires human relationships and interactions. And I think I like just like really missed that. And so when I started turning to poetry and it was very like internal, um, that was something I missed. But then like suddenly there were so many like people I was starting to connect with, including Ariane when I started writing poetry. And so I wasn't missing the like people connection suddenly when I was writing poetry. Um, and so uh yeah, I think just like I started writing in general because I wanted to be with people and myself. So yeah.
You're speaking to my heart, Brian, about the missing the community of theater. But you aren't interviewing me. I'm interviewing all of you. So, Ariane, how about you? How and why did you become a poet?
That's so delightful, Brian. All of that makes me so happy. Poetry is also very, very communal for me. I started writing apparently sometime in middle school. I don't remember why, because I didn't read poetry very much. But I started, and then I got more into it in high school. And my first girlfriend was like, "Hey, why don't you come to this after-school poetry writing thing?" And I was like, "Okay." And that set off like a chain reaction. I got involved with the Hugo House. I got involved with You Speak Seattle and found like a community around writing. And like specifically like the Seattle community, both the youth and like tangential to the adult communities that I am now part of. And now I teach in a lot of the youth programs. So it just kind of, and I kept going with it. Like no matter what else I was doing, there was just always writing happening. And then a few years ago, I was like, well, we just keep doing this no matter what else. So I guess maybe we should do this more intentionally. But always very communal. Yeah, like I don't write without some kind of community around.
My daughter told me that I ended up teaching for the same reason, that I was always a teacher, and then eventually I got a job doing it. So I'm going to stick with you, Ariane, for the next. How do your poems develop? Where do you draw inspiration from? What's your process like?
There are lots. There are like kind of a couple of main ones, I guess. So for exhibits specifically, that was a project that developed out of one weird poem that I wrote when I had a massive crunch deadline in grad school. And I was just so depressed. And I was like, I have to turn in 4 pages to this person I love and respect tomorrow. How's that going to go? And then I wrote one thing and then he loved it and we worked with it a lot. And then a year later, I kind of realized like, oh, I think this is actually part of a much larger project. And so then like I kept writing pieces like towards kind of what that piece was getting at and figuring out what the larger concepts were and figuring out what techniques I wanted to try, like especially from reading a lot of other experimental writers and saying like, ooh, they're doing this way. I want to try what happens if I do my version of that. And so that's how that project kind of spiraled out. It was like little sparks and like concepts, and then at the end figuring out what are the missing beats and how can I fill those in with poems. So that's how it happens sometimes. A lot of times, especially when I'm like, hate driving because I don't write when I drive. Like if I walk or I bike or I bus or things like that, I write a lot. And so a lot of those are just little things that come up. I notice everything all the time. And so a lot of poems just come out of really like aggressive noticing.
Mhm.
So those are two of the like main modes that the poems get developed.
I feel like you've already answered the last question, the advice for other writers, the aggressive noticing would be a great bit of writerly advice. Brian, how about for you? Where do your poets come from, or poems come from? What's your inspiration? What's your process?
Yeah, oh my gosh, obsessed with aggressive noticing. Uh, yeah, I feel like very much in a similar vein, I get kind of like preoccupied with like trying something or like playing with something. I can often, I'll like speak for my plays that often like I'll be obsessed with like a single image or like
Hmm.
having fun in a genre, or like one of my plays I was just like, I want to write a murder mystery, but I also want to write like like a love story that's a polycule and like all of this other stuff, and so it was just like all like came up into one little stew, so often just through like playing, and seeing what happens, and also along those lines, just like thinking about questions. Often I'll have like a question about myself or about like one specific instance in my life where it's like, how did that, why did it happen like that? And like probe further as like what happened there, kind of like explode it. Or um, I'm also like energized by relationships. Like I don't know why, but like letters feel like easier for me as an in to write poetry because there's like a direct like person that I'm like writing to. And so like relationships are between people, and like um how fraught they can be in different contexts, but also how joyful they can be in different contexts. Those are really energizing. Um, yeah, it's just kind of like I let the poem or the thing take me wherever it wants to take me. So, um,
Well, and you gave me an in for the next question. This was not on the list that I sent you ahead of time. This came out of reading the work samples that you both directed me to, because I noticed that both of you experiment with form and style in very what seems to be really deliberate ways. And then, Ariane, you set this up even better when you held up the two boxes over each other. So I guess the question is like, can you speak to the significance of style and form? Which is kind of obviously tied with, but separate from subject matter in your work. Like, what is the significance of style and form in your work that seems so present? Oh yeah, I should have said, Brian, can I keep going back and forth? Since we left off with you, I'll have you start this one.
okay, cool. Uh, I am gonna answer this the best I can in like draft, but for me, like form, like the form of a piece is like directly related to like body, in a very like physical sense, like my body, and I feel like I have always been seeking this is kind of like a leap of a metaphor, but like I feel like throughout my life I've been seeking to like marry subject, like my subject and my form into like one like more harmonious thing. I think a lot of like in my life so far that has come out through like gender, but it also has a lot to do with like a lot of other things like race, class, stuff like that. But in like a single like piece, form itself and like being able to stretch out and into it has a lot to do for me about um, uh, like making sure the subject gets the appropriate space that it wants to occupy, and like form itself can sometimes be like a structural force that is oppressive. And so I love breaking breaking the form. And it's just like happens to be that like a lot of my subjects are interested in like breaking structure, but so that's kind of like where I get off on breaking forms. So I'll end there.
This is why I love talking to poets about craft, because you're poetic in talking about craft. It's just great. Ariane, what do you have?
Yeah, again, draft version. Kind of like what Brian was saying about like that marriage of like form and content, that's so important to me, of like how are they working together to tell the same story. Like I like a lot of very weird art, like I like weird film, I love weird installation art. I like things that kind of are about creating an experience for the audience. And I think form is one of the most effective ways to do that, and modulating different aspects of form. Form is also like a million bajillion different sliders that you're constantly adjusting and playing with. Yeah, but I like the weird stuff because of how it creates a different experience. This book actually right here, this black one, House of Leaves, is the first book I read that really like kind of messed me up in a good way, where I was like, oh, you can make your reader work. You don't have to give things to them. You can hand them the tools and be like, you're going to make your own way through this. You're going to put effort into this too. And that's very exciting for me thinking about form.
I had to reach out to one of my grad school cohorts to remind me of the title of that book just this quarter in my comics class when we were talking about closure. And someone mentioned that, like, oh, outside of comics, the words are really tied into one order. And I went, oh, not always are they tied into one order. That's great. So this, I'm intrigued by especially how the two of you are going to handle this question, which is, how do you define or envision artistic or literary success? And Ariane, I'm going to put that one on to you first.
Yeah, cool. No, I think this is an interesting question, because I think you can make a lot of assumptions about it. I think it's actually really worth like every artist thinking about this for themselves, and especially every teacher of art thinking about this for themselves and for their students. I think for me, success as an artist is when people have an experience I have created for them. Like they feel something, and maybe it's what I kind of hope they would, maybe it's not, but that like something is happening for them. That is how I feel successful. And when they're having thoughts or reactions or questions or feeling in response to whatever I made, that feels like success to me. And there are things that can feel more and less successful, but I think that's the like vague idea.
Yeah, it's definitely not a binary. Brian, how about for you? How do you define or envision artistic or literary success?
Yeah, I have a I feel like probably everybody has a weird relationship with the word success. But for me, it's been helpful to reframe the word like success into something more like care. So like, what does like literary care look like, and what does artistic care look like? Um, in the sense of like, is my work being cared for by me and like the people I'm sharing it with, and like am I caring for others by like sharing my work? And so just like having like artistic relationships like the one I have with Ariane is like something that I would like categorize as caring and therefore like successful. um and the same like goes for like the people in my community who like engage with my work, but also like what my work is doing, if anything. And that care is possible even without like institutional recognition or like obviously monetary like like monetary success, or like um financial gain is like necessary for a lot of reasons when we're living in the world we are living in today. So that's like kind of a different conversation. But for where I'm at, I've had to think about it more about like feeling warm and cared for. So.
And if we were really in it for the money, we wouldn't have become artists and teachers. We're in this for a different reason. So in different ways, you both work in or associated with theater. Brian, you're a little bit more directly, Ariane, you're currently in residence with Seattle Rep. So I'm interested to hear you talk about, and probably with different focuses, how you see that relationship between working in theater as a medium and working in poetry. And Brian, we'll start with you, and I think you probably had the deepest theater connection.
Yeah, I mean, Ariane's theater like stuff goes way back, so you're gonna, there's more to be mined there.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I feel like I lost the question, but like relationship to theater and like my writing.
Yeah, well, the relationship between theater and poetry in particular, because I think there's always seemed to be some kind of really important connection between those two worlds.
Yeah, I think my brain leapt to like the way in which theater is about, at least the words of theater. There's like a lot of aspects to theater we could talk about, but at least the words and the dialogue of theater are words that the characters or beings on stage choose to utter, and they're making deliberate choices to say those words, and that is like kind of distinct to theater in the sense that there are a lot of words in all of the other mediums of writing that aren't necessarily uttered or spoken or like directed outward to the world, and so that has also like made me think about the relationship to words with poetry and like what it means to speak poetry and read poetry to other people, and also what happens if like poetry that is not necessarily spoken is like transferred into a spoken state. This is getting a little convoluted, but my like the last play I wrote has a lot of like I wrote a lot of poetry that was like supposed to be spoken, and like thinking about how like poetry feels very like internal, but like externalizing it. I'm gonna stop there before I talk in circles.
I remember being really struck the first time I heard a good reader of Victorian poetry read Victorian poetry out loud, because I'd experienced it on the page up to that point, and it seemed like that's where it belonged until someone actually that knew how to read it uttered it, and I experienced the poetry in an entirely different way. So yeah, I definitely hear that connection between that necessity of the utterance and the way it changes things. Ariane, how do you see the connection, the relationship between those two worlds or your work within them?
Brian, will you just put necessity of the utterance in the chat as a pin for later? Because that's great. So I think I have like two main thoughts on this. One is, I think they're like two of the weirder kinds of art. Like any art can get as weird as it wants, but like I feel like overall, like theater and poetry both skew weird. And I don't think I realized that until I brought my partner to a play a couple months ago. And I didn't know it was like her first time seeing a play somehow. And she was like, this art form is weird. This is a weird thing that people do. And I was like, oh, I think you're actually right about that. Theater is super weird. I'm just really used to it. So I think they're both just like really weird and out there in a way that not all forms kind of are inherently, even though they can do that. And the other thought I have is, as Brian mentioned, I do have a theater background, but mine is in like technical theater and stage management and stuff like that. And I think that there's a way like, there's so many people involved in creating a play. Like if you're not involved in theater, I think most people just think of actors, but there's directors, there's lighting technicians, there's stage techs, there's sound design, there's sets, there's costume, there's a million things that go into creating this cohesive experience that people receive relatively, not simply, but like relatively straightforwardly. And I feel like poetry is a bit like that too. Like the amount of craft that goes into most poems, and like we were talking about with form, like all those little things you can modulate, those to me feel like all those theatrical choices that we make. And then what the audience receives feels straightforward, but it's actually very precisely controlled from a number of angles, all of which have been like studied and like poured a lot of love into. So those feel very similar to me. And I think there's a lot of back and forth there. Like I've learned a lot from working. I learned a lot about how you create artistic experiences for people from my time in theater, specifically technical theater.
An interesting possible connection, having the background in technical theater. And Brian, I feel like looking at your resume, like me, you spent a lot of time in fringe theater, where we end up, the playwright is running lights sometimes, like everyone's doing everything. But there's that technical connection then that also kind of came out when you were talking about the way that the two of you look at form, that you have this relationship with your art that is both, very emotionally based, but also has this, like a technical aspect to it, or maybe it's a respect for the technical aspect. Do you think that having some technical theater background influences the way that you approach, or technical theater, or just technical? There's a different word I'm looking for, I can't find. Art technology background influences the way that you approach your creative work. I'll hit you, Arian, first.
Cool. Yeah, totally. But I think my art is influenced by literally everything all the time. Like I consume a lot of different kinds of art. I've dabbled a lot of different things. I'm like, some of the biggest influences when I was finishing up exhibits were like Taylor Swift, this video game I was playing, and this Chinese romance novel I was reading. Like, so it all comes in. But I do think like there's a certain framing that you can get from things like theater and like any kind of live performance type of things, where the focus is on what is happening for the audience and looking at things from the audience perspective. Like that changes how I think about publishing. Like I'm not publishing pieces because I wrote them. I'm publishing pieces because I want other people to see them and have an experience with them. There are lots of things I write that I do not wish to publish because they were for me. Mm-hmm. And it's not about the audience. So if I am publishing, I'm thinking about the audience and what they're going to get from it, how they're going to interact with it.
Mm-hmm. Brian, how about you? Do you think your experience with the technical aspects have influenced your creative work?
Yeah, it's funny because I actually started in theater as being like a light board operator. That was like my first thing I did as like in high school. So, and then when I went to college, like I started lighting design, and then I moved into sound design, and that was like primarily how I was able to be in the room, was just like being backstage and like watching people do things, and then like going up on ladders and doing all sorts of other things. But I think it's certainly given me as like a playwright a lot more like, I don't know if respect is the right word, although I obviously do respect technical theater. But like I am grateful for their expertise and like no longer feel the need to dictate like what I want to see. Like I'm much more interested in what they see when they read my work. And so like my stage directions like tilt towards the like poetic or just like emotional. And then I'm like much more interested in seeing like what the designers bring to the table in a play, and I like love like everything just being different than what I expected, because they're like, that's their job. It's not my job as the writer to design a play. Anyway, I have a lot of opinions about that. And at least with poetry, I feel like it's at least given me a lot more understanding about how much I can control and what I can't control, and like just like letting it be what it is, and then like what happens afterwards, like we make together. As Ariane was saying, like the experience is like a built thing that is not necessarily like 100% in our control. So yeah.
That's probably the thing I've tried to get young playwrights to understand more than anything else, is that leap of faith they're going to have to go through, that you have some like vision of what it's going to be like at the end, but you don't actually have control of that. So this question will be tricky for you to decide how you want to focus it, because I realize when I say something like in your field that both of you do a lot of different things. But what is something that has surprised you in working in your field? And that you can focus on a form of art or teaching or whatever you like. But Brian, I'll put you on the spot first for this. Something that surprised you in your work.
Yeah, I'm thinking, unfortunately. No, no. This isn't necessarily surprising, but like I I like wish I had taken this leap a little bit like sooner, I guess. Is that like in the past, this is my first school year teaching, um and being a teaching artist. And it has been like such a delightful experience to like be able to work with students and like write poetry, and do theater with them. And it feels really energizing to me in my own like work. And just like also by being a teaching artist, I can like been able to give myself more time to like to write my own stuff, and like work on my own art. And while that series of events isn't necessarily like super surprising, I think I was like caught off guard by how like more content and like with like how things are right now than I was like before, like working full time. Like I feel like stability is a thing that I still crave and am looking for. Like kind of like running all over the place as a teaching artist is like certainly something that I've chosen to do and enjoy, but the I don't like miss like just being like working full time. And
Has most of that teaching
so
been in person?
yes, it's been in elementary schools
Oh, through
mostly.
writers in the schools,
So
right? Yeah. That
yeah.
just being in the room with students is so energizing, and I really miss it a lot. Ariane, how about you? What have you learned while you've been working in your various pursuits that have surprised you?
Yeah, I think I'm also going to talk about being a teaching artist. Um, Gotta love it. I think what like really surprised me was how good it's been for like my soul as a writer, kind of, and like how much I am constantly learning from my students, even after like a bunch of years and a lot of different spaces for that, and how like I feel like the way I relate to my own work has changed because of how I relate to their work.
Mhm.
And I want to amend or like add on a criteria for my success definition earlier, because this is what I think about with my students, and it's like helped me think about this for myself. There's the question of like, are you achieving what you were trying to do? Are you doing what you were trying to do? Is like the main thing I think about with the kids, of like, you were trying to do this thing. Is that what's happening? Cool, you like did it. And that's helped me to think about my own work that way, of like, am I accomplishing the thing I was trying to do with this piece? And I don't think I expected, like teachers were always learning from our students, but I don't think I expected just how deeply and consistently and how like fun that would be, like
Yeah.
almost every time I'm in a classroom.
What age groups are the two of you working with? You said elementary, but like what grades have you been working with? Ariane and then Brian.
I mostly work with 6th through 12th graders. Occasionally I do adult classes, and I'm going to be doing some college next year, but 6th and 9th are my favorite.
I'm a little like also range. I've worked with 3rd through 6th graders this past year. And I kind of, they're all very different, but it's all very fun as well. They're still sweet and a little timid, but still like very eager to do very silly things. So
And so okay, just a few more questions. And folks in the room, if you have some questions that you would like us to ask the guests, you can put them in the chat, and we might have some time to let you actually unmute and ask the questions yourself. Let's see, I'll start with Brian for this one. What has been your favorite thing that you have written, and why?
Gosh, I feel like it changes every year.
Yeah, I should ask that question. Like, today,
sure.
what is the favorite thing you've ever written?
Yeah, I guess I will talk about it like as an experience because that'll be easier for me. But I wrote this play called Hello Kitty Syndrome, and I had to do it on Zoom because that's just like the nature of the time period. But it ended up being such a like rewarding experience to do on Zoom because it was like we got to do a lot of fun tricks and stuff. And the play itself was very much like exploring like facets of form and like identity and like how Hello Kitty being a little girl and not a cat is like kind of made me have an existential crisis. And like how that like I was writing that play and then I like um came out as trans. So it was like I was like writing the play, figuring it out and like myself out, and then I was like, oh, okay. And then it also like unlocked the play for me, but it, like became about a lot more things than just that as well. But it was just like so fun to like do with an ensemble. It was just like a genre mashup that was like and it was like a comedy and something that I've like I was writing it like right after I'd written something like kind of like much more intense. So just like a breath of fresh air. That was really fun.
That's a beautiful example of something written for yourself and the audience at the same time. Ariane, how about you?
I think my favorite piece today is a piece called My Lady Story. And it's not published anywhere. But it's very special to me. There are just like so many great moments I've had with it. Like writing it, it was an assignment with my grad school mentor who is very dear to me and is a very good friend now. And he had assigned me to write a 5 or 6 page poem, I think, which I had never done before. And I spent 3 days doing almost nothing else, just playing the original Hadestown album, not the Broadway, but the original one. And what is it? I Am a Bird Now by Anthony and the Johnsons, just playing those 2 albums on loop for 3 days, going like into weird, dark places, and emerged with this like 6 page poem that I loved and that has like had so many special moments for me since. Like the first time I read it, like a bunch of people had like a really strong emotional experience with it and said how much it meant to them. And then like when it was up in exhibits, there was like I didn't know it was part of exhibits until one night I was like going to bed. And then, you know, you have all those like midnight, like epiphany about my work. And I was like, wait, this poem is an exhibit and it's the overture and it goes at the end. And like, that was just so delightful. And then putting it up in exhibits, and it was my high school mentor, who is also now a very good friend and very dear to me, was going through, and like the last section of that poem was one of the places where he and I spent a lot of time just like standing there and talking during like the last half hour the show was open. And like he could feel the place where that particular part of the poem was written, and like just there are just so many sweet memories I have with that piece.
That's great. I love those times where we spend all of our writing project listening to 1 or 2 albums and nothing else, just on loop. Amy Mann's Bachelor #2 got me through a whole weekend of playwriting once. So we had a great question in the chat from Abel Bryant. What's it like to collaborate with someone on poems or another type of writing? And maybe we'll do that. We're going to split both our questions up. Let's just start there. What's it like to collaborate with someone on poem or another type of writing, if you've had the chance to do that? Ariane first, then we'll go to Brian.
I think it depends. Like every collaboration is so different. So last year I got to collaborate on like, I had written a poem, and then through my Jack Straw Fellowship, we got matched up with musicians at Bushwick Book Club Seattle. And so I got to work with Kate Olson, who is like an incredible saxophone player, but is also an experimental noise musician. And so like the collaboration with her was so fun, of just like the going back and forth. Like we weren't creating something at the same time, but it was like, I pass a thing to you, you pass it back, and we negotiate that until there's something that we're both just so pumped about. That I didn't know collaboration could work like that. I thought we both had to be like doing the same thing at the same time the whole time, but the back and forth was really fun.
That's awesome. Brian, how about you?
Yeah, for me, it's kind of like an essential part of me is like that, like my writing is like in collaboration with people. I guess I'll speak about like playwriting, um, and like the fact that like after you write a play, like people have to inhabit the characters, and it's like very important to me that the people, like the actual people who are like in the roles, feel like they're human. And so their feedback and what they bring to the characters is like super valuable to me. And I'll often just like change a line so it fits better in someone's mouth, or like someone's like, this doesn't make any sense to me, or just like whatever is like working for them in the moment. I'm also very like pro, like I'll change anything you want, like within reason, and just like collaborating with the people in the room, and like making the play itself a space where we're all bringing our own sort of things to it, and making it together, and that like my writing is simply one part of it. So that's how I feel about that. And like I will say that I am very pro not writing alone also. Like if maybe you're not necessarily like collaborating on the piece and like both making new work into the piece, but that like even if you're writing or sharing your writing and like getting feedback, and or just like writing in space with other people, I feel like that's really important.
So did you read ahead just so you could set up the next question perfectly? Because the question continues with, also, I'm not part of any writing or art community, so do you have advice on getting to meet other writers? The community in Seattle seems awesome. I'm a running start student, so I'm in a weird spot with clubs and stuff. So Brian, how do you find those spaces where you can just write next to somebody else?
Yeah. This is a like tricky question because I will say that I've been like fairly lucky in my time like here, in the sense that like I like interned for a playwriting group like early on, and then they asked me to be a writer, so I've always had like a home base for my playwriting, and like being able to like be a part of like a fellowship group with Ariane, for example, or like other groups has been like has also extended like the amount of people who have been with me in my work. But also like to speak maybe less about those things. Like I think that just having one friend also is like really important to me. I have a friend who I've never like done, like we've collaborated on like theater together, but like we like she's a filmmaker now, and so we don't, and she moved to LA too, but like we share all of our work together, and my relationship with her is so important to me, and has felt like a community in of itself. And so I'm like very pro just like getting a bunch of friends together and like hanging out in a sleepover and being like, this is a writer's like retreat now. So so I think community can be like as like serious or unserious as you want it to be. So
That's a great place to start. Ariana, what would your advice be about, to help us find a community?
Yeah, so I have massive ADHD, so I will always like look for more external structure to help me with that. So I've always been like, as a teen, I was like writing after school things, writing summer camps, and then like as an adult, I've been like, let's get some fellowships, let's teach in writing spaces. And that's what really helps me because then you just make friends with people and then you have those like kind of connections. There's so many ways to get structure though. Also like all the library systems have drop-in writing classes and like there's literary magazines, there's all sorts of different ways you can find external structure. But like Brian's saying, like sometimes it is just nice to have friends. Like I think I was better at this in high school of just like writing with my friends who didn't want to be professional writers, but just thought it was kind of fun to write poems sometimes. We used to just do that on sleepovers. And you can just do that. Like you don't need to like find writers, you can kind of make writers. Like I want my friends to write, so I'm having a writing sleepover party. Like, yeah, you can be chill about it or really intense. I tend towards intense though.
Well, I think that perfectly sets up a final question as we are running to the last couple of minutes of the hour, which is, and you kind of like this was a specific piece of it, but what would be your final advice of the day to your fellow and or aspiring writers and artists? Ariane, I'll put you on the spot first.
They're like, joy is really awesome and you deserve to feel it and you deserve to love your work. And people who are telling you that loving your work makes you a worse writer are just wrong and you should ignore them. Like you deserve to enjoy writing and love the things you make.
It's going to be hard for me to put that needle point, but I kind of want to. They're wrong and you should ignore them. I love that. Brian, what are you going to leave us with?
Yeah, I'm still learning this one, so I could be a hypocrite with this. But if someone says that they want to read your work, or that they want to like know about what you're doing with your writing, you should trust them and share it with them, because they are not out to get you and they are not lying. They genuinely care, and they like. This is so funny because I like something clicked for me because in Sex Education, the TV show, there's this line where the mom tells Adam, like the character, like it like lets people know that they matter to you when you invite them to things and like invite them into your own world, which includes your writing. Okay.
Oh, that's lovely. I love that. Brian and Ariane, thank you so much for your time, for the insight, for how much fun I just got to have for the last hour. And I even got paid to do this. It's crazy. I love my job. I will also let you know, and we'll post to our social media as well when I get this Zoom recording and replace the broken YouTube recording I'm doing over there. Keep your eyes out. On June 3rd, we'll be releasing the Licton Springs Review for 2022 with student, staff, faculty, and alumni art. And we hope to do more of these in the future. Brian and Ariane, again, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who showed up today. Really appreciate it. It was great to see you all. Take care.